It looks like we are all set.
Okay, terrific. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Senate Executive Departments and Administration Committee meeting. I am Senator Sharon Carson from District 14, and today we will be holding a meeting of the Senate Executive Committee on Executive Departments and Administration. Before we get started, I'll read through a checklist to ensure that the meeting we are holding is in compliance with the right to know law. As chair of the Senate Committee on Executive Departments and Administration, I find that due to the state of emergency declared by the governor as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and in accordance with the governor's emergency order number 12, pursuant to Executive Order 2020-04 and its extensions, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. Please note there is no physical location to observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting, which was authorized pursuant to the governor's emergency order. In accordance with the emergency order, I am confirming that 1, we are providing public access to the meeting by telephone with additional access possible by video and other electronic means. We are utilizing Zoom for this electronic meeting. All members of the committee and selected legislative staff have the ability to communicate contemporaneously in this meeting through this platform, and the public has access to contemporaneously watch and or listen to the meeting on Zoom or YouTube and via phone by following the directions and links provided on the General Court website. 2, we have provided public notice of the necessary information for accessing the meeting in the Senate calendar. 3, we are providing a mechanism for the public to alert the public body during the meeting if there are problems with access. If anyone has a problem, please email remotesenate@leg.state.nh.us or call area code 603-271-6931. 4, in the event the public is unable to access the meeting, it will be adjourned and rescheduled. 5, please note that all votes taken during this meeting shall be done by roll call vote. And 6, finally, let's get the meeting started by taking roll call attendance. When each member states their presence, please also state where they are and if anyone else is in the room with you during the meeting, which is required under the right to know law. I will call the roll. Senator Prentice.
Senator Prentice, home in West Lebanon, New Hampshire. My husband, I'm alone in this room. My husband is in the house. Thank you.
Senator Kavanaugh.
Hello, Kevin Kavanaugh, at my home in Manchester. Alone in the room. My wife is in the house.
Senator Reagan. John, we can't hear you. We can't hear you.
Office by myself.
Thank you. And Senator Ricciardi?
Good morning, Senator Ricciardi, and I am in my office at the State House alone.
And I'm Senator Carson. I am at my home in Londonderry, and my daughter is in the next room. Okay, we're going to go ahead and we are going to get started. The first public hearing that we have today is on House Bill 141, and I'm going to go ahead and open the hearing on House Bill 141 and recognize the prime sponsor, Representative Rung.
Senator Carson, I don't see Representative Rung as an attendee. It doesn't look like she's here at the moment.
Okay. Okay, so let's go to, I see Representative.
I'm sorry, it does look like Representative Schuett has her hand raised. Perhaps she's here to represent.
Okay.
Representative.
All right, let's go to Representative Schuett then.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, members of Senate EDNA. Yes, I can speak for Representative Rung. Actually, what happened with House Bill 141, the original bill that she put in was dealing with the environmental effects of fire suppressants, which came to House EDNA, and we had the hearing on it and learned that the bill was a little premature. There were a lot of elements in it that were uncertain, and it appeared that we were planning to excuse me just a moment. My computer decided it was going to restart and I had to tell it no. So we ended up with an agreement sort of with Representative Rung that we were putting that bill aside and then proceeded to have a hearing on a totally non-germane amendment, which is basically the bill that you see now. The new title of the bill is allowing a county to exempt its chief administrative officer from compulsory participation in the retirement system. This came about sort of at my behest. My county, Merrimack County, was in a position where the person who had been in charge, well, he's technically still is the superintendent of our House of Corrections, began filling in for our chief administrative officer and was reluctant to trade in his 30 plus years in Group 2 retirement for a position that would be Group 1 for the remaining approximately 5 to 8 years that he would have in his working career left. So I approached my chair of House CDNA about doing this non-germane amendment to perhaps facilitate him being able to just resign, release himself from having to go to Group 1. And this ended up being the result. We had the hearing on the first non-germane amendment and heard a lot of pushback, particularly because this would obviously short some of the income for the retirement system trust fund. So Representative Pearson and I agreed to co-sponsor, ended up becoming this bill. The amendment 0877H was adopted on this bill, and we had a hearing, a further hearing on that particular non-germane amendment. The committee chose to take it and attach it to this bill. And in fact, it passed our committee 19-0 and passed the House on the consent calendar. We see it sort of as a compromise. It would allow the addition of the county chief administrative officer to go into RSA, which currently allows municipalities to exempt their chief administrative officer, a town manager or someone of that sort. And this would just add the county administrative officer, which of course only would encompass impossible people who would be looking at this. What we did with this final amendment, however, was say that if an entity chooses to opt for this exemption, they would continue to pay the employer's portion into the retirement trust fund for the length of that specific employee's tenure in that office. We felt that way would not be depleting the trust fund and thereby affecting the unfunded liability. We know it's not a perfect solution, but it's a step our committee felt in the right direction. And I just realized I was remiss in introducing myself. I am Diane Schuett. I'm on the House ED&A committee and I represent Merrimack 20, the towns of Chichester and Pembroke. And if you have any questions, I would be glad to attempt to answer them.
Thank you very much, Representative. Are there any questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much, Representative.
Thank you.
Next, we're going to hear from Marty Carlin.
Mr. Carlin, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yep, I just did. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Marty Carlin and I'm representing the New Hampshire retirement system. The retirement system does not have a position on House Bill 141, but I signed up for informational purposes. Essentially, this exemption that would be extended to counties what is an existing exemption for municipalities for their chief administrative officer that has been in statute since the early 70s. So it would add the 10 county administrator positions theoretically to that cohort of positions that could be exempted. The exemption must be done at the initial hiring for that position by a vote of the governing body. And then that needs to be documented and sent to NHRS. So that's sort of the general overview of the exemption piece. The employer contribution for exempted positions would be on the unfunded accrued liability portion of the employer rate for a Group 1 employee member, as all of these positions would be considered Group 1 employees. That's currently 11.17% of pay. So, in general terms, this would have a very minimal impact on the retirement system, because of the number of positions exempted. But in general terms, if this bill were to pass, the employer contributions received on the unfunded liability would be somewhat greater than otherwise expected, and that resulting in a more rapid amortization and ultimately reducing employer contributions. The extent of the decline in the UAL would depend on the magnitude of the additional contributions. Yeah, in other words, it would depend how much on how many of these positions were exempted for the county or municipalities going forward. So that's, I'm glad to answer any questions from the committee.
Okay, thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions from the committee? Mr. Carlin, I received a letter from the New Hampshire Municipal Association concerning this legislation, and they make a number of points here that I think we need to get some clarification on. And they're claiming that no employer contributions are required for a municipality's chief operating officer position that is, that is exempt from participation in the retirement system. This bill would create a new cost to any municipality or county who makes this decision in the future. They also claim that requiring certain employees in this multi-employer plan to make employer contribution for exempt employees is unprecedented. So we would be doing something completely new here. And they also claim that this is concerning because at the same time, the overall contribution rates are set to increase approximately 20% effective July 1st, 2020. That's one. Do you have any comment about that?
Again, without taking a position on the legislation, this would be a new assessment on these positions that are exempted. The language in this bill is something at the request of the co-sponsors and ED&A, NHRS looked at, and it's based on some language on charging the employers the unfunded liability for using part-time retirees that was introduced several years ago, and the bill didn't advance. So the conceptual framework was there. And as Representative Schuett stated in her testimony, when the original bill without this employer payment was introduced, there wasn't enough support on ED&A because of the concern. And I've heard this myself in several committee hearings over the years that, as you carve positions out of the retirement system, the liability doesn't go away, but all the remaining contribution base for the employers are all picking up the cost of that contributions that aren't coming in on the exempted positions anymore. So in this case, this conceptually would the employer has a choice whether this is you're hiring your top executive, you're the head of the food chain, and usually those positions are negotiated in this contract, and then maybe fringe benefits and other things outside of the normal course when you're hiring a municipal employee. So this would be essentially up to the employer in negotiating with candidates. You know, do they want them in the retirement system or not? What does the candidate want? If they came from another town, a lot of the municipal managers are, you know, I think it's ICMI is, I'm not sure the acronym exactly, but it's a Municipal Managers Association pension plan. And some folks want to stay in that and have the town kick into that. So, you know, it's, you know, the language, not speaking as a lawyer, but it doesn't feel like a mandate in the sense is because the governing body has the control over whether or not to exempt positions. And, you know, if you look at the additional payments to NHRS as part of the total compensation for that position, you know, say you're down to 2 people and one wants to not be in the retirement system and one does, do you pick the best person or do you pick, you know, the one that's going to save you some money? And that's, again, that's a local decision. You know, that's sort of just general comments on the NHMA questions.
Okay. The other thing that the other point that they made, and they actually gave us an example that's based on the rates published by the retirement system effective July 1st, 2021. It says the employer contribution rate required for a chief administrative officer of a political subdivision is 14.06% of payroll. The unfunded accrued liability is 11.17% of payroll, which is 81.2% of the total pension cost. If the chief administrative office salary amounted to $110,000, the total employer contribution amount would be $15,466. And the unfunded accrued liability amount would be $12,287, nearly removing any incentive to the municipality or county to accept this position. Do you agree with this?
Yes. The Municipal Association representative, you know, ran the calculation by us a couple of days ago, and it's correct. So essentially,
okay,
you know, there's no issue with that example.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Carlin. Are there any further questions for Mr. Carlin? Senator Prentice has a question.
No, if it would be for Mr. Carlin, but
Yes.
looking for an updated fiscal note. There was a fiscal note, which didn't really have anything in it when it was related to DES. Maybe I'm missing something in the OneDrive. I was searching around because it sounds like the fiscal impact is a local one, so it would be should we have that?
We just received a fiscal note request on this last week, and I believe it's due in. The actuarial analysis is due in today, and we'll be submitting that to LBA once we get that piece of it. So yeah, we just received on the amended version when it passed the House last week is when we got a new fiscal note request on this. So it's en route.
Cool. All right. Cool. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay. Are there any further questions for Mr. Carlin? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much, Mr. Carlin.
Thank you, Seth.
Next, we're going to hear from Becky Benvenuti.
Becky, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I am Becky Benvenuti, and I'm the Government Finance Advisor for the New Hampshire Municipal Association. We became aware of the second non-germane amendment to HB 141, which was offered at the end of March after our last Board of Directors meeting, and we will be sharing and explaining the effects of the bill to our board at our meeting this Friday. At this point, I am not authorized to express an official position on the bill, but I appreciate the opportunity to offer some information to the committee, which I thank Senator Carson. I really, other than you did an excellent job summarizing what our letter, which was submitted earlier, says. So I, rather than to repeat that and take your time, I would be happy to answer any questions which you may have.
Okay, thank you very much for your testimony, Ms. Benvenuti. Are there any questions from the committee? Ms. Benvenuti, thank you. And I appreciate the letter. And just ask you when your committee meets on Friday, if you can provide us with some sort of an update, because I think from what I'm seeing on the face of this is giving the counties the ability to exempt their chief officer from paying into the system, and they will pay in their employer rate. And I just don't know if this is a precedent that we want to establish. But again, that's going to be for the committee to determine. So thank you again for the well-written letter, and we will look forward to what you have to say on Friday.
Yeah, absolutely. I will respond to the committee following that meeting immediately. Thank you for
Okay.
your time.
Thank you very much. Okay, Aaron, is there anyone in the waiting room that would like to speak on this bill?
I don't see any hand. I do see one hand raised. Representative Schuett.
Okay, we'll hear from Representative Schuett again.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to point out that we did in fact design this amendment specifically so that it would not be retroactive and only going forward, so that any entity that chose this option would know going in that that expense would be implicit in their decision. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else, Aaron?
I don't see anyone else with their hand raised.
Okay, I am going to go ahead and close the public hearing on House Bill 141. Okay. Next, we're going to open the public hearing on House Bill 369 and recognize the prime sponsor, Representative McGuire.
Senator Carson, it doesn't look like Representative McGuire is here. But I did see Representative Schuett had her hand raised.
Okay, we'll go ahead and recognize Representative Schuett again.
Morning, I am Ann Schuett again, representing House ED&A. Representative McGuire is unfortunately in transit at the moment and asked me to introduce this bill on her behalf. Again, this came to House ED&A. We voted to adopt it and put it on the consent calendar. She asked me to just introduce it, and she felt that someone from OPLC was going to be here to speak more in depth about the tenets of the bill. So I would be happy to answer questions, but most likely would defer to OPLC.
Okay, thank you very much, Representative Schuett. Let's go ahead and hear from Tina Kelly.
Miss Kelly, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm Tina Kelly, appearing on behalf of the Office of Professional Licensure and Certification. OPLC is in support of this bill. Passage of this bill will remove the requirement for New Hampshire licensed occupational therapists and occupational therapy assistants to apply for and obtain a certificate to provide physical agent modalities. Removal of the barrier to obtain the separate certificate will protect the public by ensuring the training needed is clearly outlined, while ensuring services are allowed to be provided as soon as the practitioner is trained. We hope that you'll vote this bill ought to pass, and I'd be glad to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Kelly. Are there any questions from the committee? Hey, Ms. Kelly, I just want to make sure that we received an email from Ms. Freeman, who is the chair of the New Hampshire Occupational Therapy Governing Board, and they are in unanimous support of this legislation.
That is correct. I've worked with them on this, and they are fully in support of it.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any additional questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Ms. Kelly.
Thank
you. Okay, next we're going to go to Lisa Owen.
I don't see Miss Owen in the attendees list, but I do see a phone number. Miss Owen, if that's you, could you press *9? It doesn't look like it.
Okay, let's see is there a way to see who it is, or just ask them to press *9 if they want to speak?
I think *9's the only way. Yeah.
Okay. All right, okay, well, if that's the only way, and we'll have to, this is Ms. Owen was the last person that I had, who had signed up to speak, so there's no one else.
There's no one else. That's correct.
Oh. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and close the public hearing on House Bill 369. We have a few moments. Would anyone like to exec?
Move to executive session.
Okay, Senator Kavanaugh moves to executive session, seconded by Senator Reagan. We just heard House Bill 369. It
Senator
appears
Carson?
that,
There needs
yes.
to be a roll call to go into executive session.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you for reminding me. Okay, I will call the roll. Senator Prentice,
Senator Prentice, you're muted.
Use, yep, yes, thank you.
Senator Kavanaugh,
Yes.
Senator Reagan,
Yes.
Senator Rishardi,
Yes.
and Senator Carson. Yes. We just heard House Bill 369. Can I get a motion on House Bill 369? Senator Prentice?
Second.
Senator Prentice is muted again.
Gosh, not my day.
That's
369
okay.
ought to pass is my motion. Thank you.
And seconded by Senator Kavanaugh. Is there any discussion on the ought to pass motion? Okay, seeing none, I will call the roll. Senator Prentice,
Yes.
Senator Kavanaugh,
Yes.
Senator Reagan,
Yes.
Senator Rishardi,
Yes.
and Senator Carson, yes.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion for the consent calendar moved by Senator Reagan, seconded by Senator Kavanaugh. Is there any discussion on the consent motion? Seeing none, I will call the roll. Senator Prentice,
Yes.
Senator Kavanaugh,
Yes.
Senator Reagan,
Yes.
Senator Rishardi,
Yes.
and Senator Carson, yes. Senator Rishardi, would you like to be responsible for the blurb on this one?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Can I get a motion to come out of executive session?
How about
Moved by-
141?
Do folks feel comfortable enough on voting on 141?
Yes.
Okay, so Senator Reagan, do you have a motion?
I move on to pass.
Okay, is there a second on the ought to pass? Okay, I don't see a second on the ought to pass. Okay, is there a subsequent motion? Or would you folks like to wait on this one?
I would be real
Senator
comfortable
Prentice?
waiting. Oh, sorry.
I would just be interested in the updated fiscal note that
Okay.
they're preparing. That's the only reason I wouldn't second or have further discussion is I want that fiscal note, and then I think we can proceed. So I appreciate Senator Reagan's motion, but I want to just hold.
Okay, Senator Kavanaugh?
I was going to say the same thing. I feel more comfortable just waiting to see what comes back. And if that board is meeting Friday as well, with the fiscal note and their recommendations, I'd just like to hear that before we go forward.
Okay, all right, so the ought to pass motion fails. So can I get a motion to come out of executive session? Moved by Senator Prentice, seconded by Senator Rishardi. Okay, I will call the roll. Senator Prentice,
Yes.
Senator Kavanaugh,
Yes.
Senator Reagan,
Yes.
Senator Rishardi,
Yes.
and Senator Carson, yes. Okay, the next bill we are going to hear is House Bill 499. And we have, again, Representative McGuire, but I don't see anyone from House ED&A who has signed up to testify on this bill.
It
Although
looks
I'm sorry?
Sorry, Senator Carson. It looks like Representative Smith has her hand raised.
Okay, that's who I was gonna call, see if we could put Representative Smith through.
Good morning.
Good morning, Representative Smith.
Good to see you again. Representative McGuire is unavailable and asked me if I could introduce this bill to Senate EDNA on her behalf. So with your permission, I'll just proceed.
Okay, sure, that's fine, Representative Smith.
So I'm Marjorie Smith. I represent Durham and Madbury in the New Hampshire House, and I am a co-sponsor of House Bill 499. Last term, the House ED&A Committee devoted significant time and effort to producing an amended bill addressing facial recognition. The bill passed the committee, the full House, and was sent to the Judiciary Committee. I was chair of Judiciary, and I considered the House Judiciary Committee's ultimate rejection of the bill to be my most significant disappointment of my chairmanship. In the time that has passed since then, we have experienced again and again the damage that can be done by the inappropriate application of facial recognition systems. Understanding that careful application by trained professionals can make facial recognition systems a positive addition to law enforcement tools, we must also acknowledge that misuse can cause grave harm, with particular injustice felt by people of color and by women of all colors. The bill before you includes an amendment drafted by House ED&A Committee Chair McGuire and myself that attempts to minimize the harm and maximize the benefit by providing a uniform warrant requirement to use this technology. We take privacy seriously in New Hampshire. Facial recognition technology is invasive, and if not monitored, will move us closer and closer to a surveillance state. Watching British detective stories while I wait for the end of my COVID-induced house arrest, I have been appalled by the reliance on surveillance, block by block, house by house. There is no privacy under such systems. This bill, as it passed the House, makes it easier to understand and easier for the police to use. Warrants are common law enforcement tools with well-established standards. Warrants are easily obtained, and in this state, judges react quickly when time is of the essence. This bill strikes a balance between the potential benefits of this technology and concerns about privacy rights and misuse. On behalf of the sponsors, on behalf of the ED&A Committee, and in behalf of the House, I would ask that you vote or to pass on House Bill 499.
Thank you very much, Representative Smith. Are there any questions? Senator Prentice has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Representative Smith. So a couple of questions. It might only be one, actually, but are there cases in New Hampshire where this has been misused? How did this come about for you to want to?
You mean, how did the bill come about? The bill came about because across the country, facial recognition is being marketed as as the great new innovation in policing and monitoring work. And we were concerned that I'm sure there'll be other people who will follow. And if you really want to dive into it, I could send you lots and lots of documents about the incredible problems that have been caused by the misuse of facial recognition. And we wanted to make sure that New Hampshire could continue its respect for privacy, as you know, one of our most recent constitutional amendments focuses on this. And we wanted to get there ahead of any egregious occasions in the state of New Hampshire. And that is why this bill was brought forward 1 or 2 terms ago, I think. Now I'm suddenly, Senator Prentice, not absolutely clear on that, but certainly last term, where there was just a lot of work put into this.
Follow up, Senator Francis?
Sure.
Yes.
So there hasn't been a misuse or an issue in New Hampshire. You're just trying to get ahead of the curve based on trending you've seen in other parts of the country.
I think I would say that generally, but I would also say that because I'm not on EDA, I'm on judiciary.
Yeah.
I have not been involved in a lot of the detailed testimony and don't feel comfortable. I guess what I would say is this is a perfect case where I would like to trust but verify. But I do know that the problems across the country have been really troublesome, and we deserve better in this state.
So this would follow up.
Yes, follow up.
This would just require, we could still use facial recognition technology if there was a proper warrant.
Absolutely. It doesn't limit facial recognition at all. It just says that recognizing the role of all branches of government in how we function, it says that the police who want to use this need to obtain a warrant. And as you all know, that is an absolutely standard tool that they have, and it can be used, it can be accessed in a very time appropriate way, meaning quickly when it's appropriate for it to be quick. But it provides a little, it's another example really of trust but verify. It's an example of where you take a minute or 2 or 15 to say, let's make sure that we're doing this the right way. You will hear testimony from, I assume you will hear testimony from the police lobbying organizations that will consider this a possible invasion of their rights. But that's the reason that we have a legislature, to make sure that all of our public officials function within an appropriate, respectful structure. And this does not create any limitations on the use of facial recognition, and it does not cause any potentially damaging delays. But it does mean that our rights to privacy are protected, and that is very important to me and to the House. And actually, I think to the Senate too.
Senator Kavanaugh?
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Prentice. Senator Kavanaugh?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for taking my question, Representative. I'm just kind of curious. You see a lot of things now, crimes committed, and you see a lot of the, whether it's a business or a private home that captures this crime being in action, I guess, and they can zoom in and see the facial recognition or picture of the person committing the crime, and then the police can go after it. Would that prevent this from happening?
No, and that's a very good question. I mean, let's go back to what happened in Boston a few years ago. And you know that as we sat there that marathon day, glued to the television, some of the video came from private businesses. Private businesses are going to be able to do what they've always been able to do in their space. What this does is say that those people who are public officials and who are charged with balancing the rights of the citizens and while carrying out their public obligation just have to get a warrant. That's all this does. It's not, this is not headline making. It is not, I mean, you and I have in the last few weeks seen a lot of bills that should be headline making, aren't necessarily work out that way. But this is not a major limitation on the right of the police to do what they believe is right in terms of preventing and solving criminal actions. It just says that they're not free to do it without any verification. That's all this does.
Okay, are there any further questions? Senator Rishardi?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Representative Smith. My understanding was that it does not invade anyone's privacy, that the images that are used are those that are legally obtained, provided by the person themselves, perhaps social media, photos, or a police arrest. What I'm concerned about is that this bill would inhibit helping victims, deceased persons, children who've been human trafficked, that this bill, if passed, would not enable them to help rescue those children.
Senator, I know exactly where the question comes from. It's a question that has come up again and again and again, and there is absolutely no documentation in any case that indicates that requiring the police to behave in a responsible way and to get a warrant, just as they would get a search warrant, and not just have the right to break into anyone's house because they think maybe something might be happening. All this does is require a warrant, and I know I would like my rights protected, and I know you would like your rights protected. There is situation after situation where facial technology is used, and it then turns out that there was an error. The technicians, the professionals who use this will tell you that it cannot be relied on for accuracy for people of color, and it cannot be relied on for accuracy, Senator, for women. For some reason, there's a gender difference in the accuracy of facial recognition technology. I have no idea about the science in it. I have no idea about, the algorithms involved. All I know is the outcome, and there have been many cases across the country where the wrong person has been detained, has been charged, has been subjected to really, inappropriate actions. And that is all that this bill is trying to accomplish. I haven't seen the list of witnesses, but I'm pretty confident that behind me are people perhaps from House eDNA and others who will be able to be a specialist in answering your questions, whereas I'm just a generalist.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Are there any further questions? Sorry to take up so much of your time, Representative Smith. I'm looking at the bill itself and
As amended.
as amended,
Right.
and it includes, you're not only talking about the state, but you're also saying that municipalities are not going to be able to use this, any school district or county. So any state entity, no matter what it is not going to be able to use this facial recognition technology without having some sort of a warrant. Am I correct?
That is correct. It applies only to the public sector. It does not apply to the private sector, but it applies to everyone who occupies a position that includes public trust. And that is everyone who is doing what we all do every day, and that's try to do the best that we can for the people of the state. And it does apply at all levels, and those warrants are accessible by everyone, and they're accessible in a very timely way. It might mean that nobody will be breaking down the wrong door.
Okay. The other question, and it's something that you brought up, that under this piece of legislation, it only applies to the state. It does not apply to private businesses. So a private business can film anybody and anywhere, anytime that enters their premises, and they can use that for their own security purposes to look for people who perhaps have had issues with shoplifting or anything else within their stores. There's nothing in this legislation that says that they cannot do that. So do you think that these businesses should post on their premises that people are being filmed and that they will be using facial recognition?
I have enough trouble, Senator, trying to figure out what the responsibility of those people in the public sector should be. I know that this legislation specifically acknowledges the fact that when you occupy a position of public trust, you have an obligation to all people. And my father-in-law had an expression that he didn't make the capitalist system, he just lived by the rules. And we used to laugh about it, but in this case, all this bill is trying to do is saying, if you take an oath to represent the public, then you have an obligation to represent the public in the fairest and most careful and precise way. And that is all that this bill does.
Okay, finally, just my last question to you is, so we have a number of cameras on our state highways. Say there's someone that's going 100 miles an hour down the state highway, putting fellow drivers at risk, and they're able to capture the face of the individual driving the car. And they want to recognize who is this person. So you're saying that they would at that point have to go to a judge or a magistrate and get a search warrant to even begin to use the facial recognition technology?
I would remind you, Senator Carson, that we have in this state legislation about people who go through the toll booths, for example, and aren't respectful of their obligation to pay the toll. Our state law says you cannot take a photo of the driver. You take a photo of the license plate, and because the license plate is a series of numbers, and it's not. So assuming the equipment is working, it's not subject to misinterpretation. And truthfully, I haven't focused on exactly what would although I do have a heavy foot when I drive. I guess I shouldn't confess to that. Fortunately, I don't think I've been pulled over by radar, but the radar again is checking the car, not the driver, until the police officer stops the car. And then there's no question in terms of identification, because there the car is stopped and the police officer approaches the car and can see the person and can identify the person in a number of different ways. And I don't see this as an inconvenience, but I see it as a respect for our privacy.
Okay, and finally, my last question, Representative, are you aware of any cases where any New Hampshire citizen has been harmed by the use of facial recognition technology by law enforcement?
Senator Prentice asked me that question, and I have the same answer. I personally am not, which is not to say that it has or it hasn't happened, but I would hope that subsequent, I'm assuming there are other people who are going to testify, and I would hope that if they have more technical and specific information than I have, they'd be able to share that with you.
Thank you very much, Representative Smith. Are there any further questions? Okay, seeing none. Oh, Senator Prentice has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm not, Representative Smith, I don't know if you have this answer, or it might be someone behind you. What's the average time when you ask for, you ask for a warrant and you get one to do this? Does anybody know what that is?
I know it can be done quickly, but it would be someone else who would be able to answer specifically.
Okay, thank you very much, Representative.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Carson. I won't see you again till this afternoon.
Okay, great. It's always a pleasure seeing you, Representative. So
Well,
hold on, Representative Smith, before you go, Senator Ricciardi has her hand up. Hopefully, last question.
Sorry, I just, you were saying about gender or women and it not being so accurate, but the National Institute for Science and Technology, which is a worldwide gold standard for science, it found that the facial recognition for the technology is 99% accurate, and that it's really used more for leads than it is actual arrests. So if they're saying it's 99% accurate, I'm just a little confused to your comment of it not being accurate for women or people of color.
I say that, we all can find the sources that tell us what we want to hear. And I'm saying that because there is a lot of research that's out there. And I'm embarrassed to say that in my preparation for today, I thought all that I was doing was representing the prime sponsor to introduce it. And so my notebooks that are full of documents with the T's crossed and the I's dotted isn't available to me. And so I apologize for letting the House down in terms of not having that information, but I hope that people behind me will be able to address your concerns, Senator.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for your testimony this morning, Representative Smith.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure. Goodbye.
Bye. Next, we're going to Representative Birch.
Representative Birch, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Right. Can people hear me?
Yes, we can. Good morning, Representative.
And good morning, Senator. It's a pleasure to see you and the other senators this morning. My name is Paul Birch. I represent Cheshire 1, which is Westmoreland, Walpole, Hinsdale, and Chesterfield. I'm on Judiciary Committee. I was a sponsor of HB 499, and I support the original bill of HB 499. I oppose the amendment, and I want to clarify a lot of information that you were just presented about the amendment. Before I get to my prepared comments, I would note on the issue of the accuracy involving people of color and women. Simply, facial recognition techniques have improved over time. It's like going from 78 RPM to what we have now. And early studies, which are way outdated, show that there were those problems. Current studies, as cited by Senator Risciardi, have indicated that that particular problem is pretty much gone. The suggestion that warrants are easily obtained is not exactly correct. Judges do have standards, and I will get into that in a moment. I'm unaware of any problems with facial recognition in New Hampshire. It's hard to get documentation on this kind of bill elsewhere because no state has adopted what is being proposed here. My history is as a career public defender. At the time of my retirement, I was Vermont's senior public defender. I represented alleged criminals for 34 years, including sex offenders against children. I know how warrants work. I have handled hundreds, if not thousands, of warrants. It was part of my day-to-day work for decades. And I know how sexual offenders against children operate, how they meet, how they find victims, and most importantly, how they use the internet. And the internet has been one of the best things from their point of view. So in response to what sexual predators do, databases have been created by Interpol, international crimes against children organizations, and the like. And basically, the way it works is and it's important to understand this, because the issue isn't about getting a warrant. Both the original bill and the amended bill require a warrant. The question is, at what point in time and with what information do you go to a judge and say, I would like a warrant? And that's the big difference between the original bill and the amended bill. So let's say the police lawfully have 1,000 images of a child, or what appears to be a child, or could be a child and not, in some sort of explicit poses. Under current methodology, law enforcement would access these databases like Interpol and identify, if they can, who the picture is of. It's a picture of Jane Smith, age 16, taken in 2015 or whatever. Once that information is obtained, then law enforcement goes to the court with that information and says, we've identified this picture as an exploited child, and we can then get a warrant. The major difference of this amendment says, no, you can't access those databases before getting a warrant. So what you have to do is go to a judge and say, Judge, I have a picture. Maybe it's an exploited child, maybe it's not. I have no way of knowing, but I'd like to get a search warrant. And you know what's going to happen? You're going to get no for an answer. And that's the problem with this bill as amended. That's why it was turned down by the Judiciary Committee last time, and why it was turned down by the House last time. Because it's a free pass for sexual offenders, sexual predators against children. And so it's the timing. It's the timing of when you get the warrant. Representative Smith emphasized, we should get a warrant, we should get a warrant, we should get a warrant. I agree 100%. But the question is, at what point? Senator Risciardi is correct. The facial recognition techniques and investigation are a tool. They are not evidence in and of itself. You do not admit into court facial recognition technique. It is a tool of law enforcement. And once that tool has produced enough to go to a judge, then you go to a judge and say, I have probable cause. I want the judge to approve and issue a warrant. Pedophiles are, I've represented enough of them. Pedophiles are mobile. They understand the internet. They understand how the internet works, and they will go and operate where they think they have the most slack. And that's why you have police officers like Detective McLaughlin in Keene, who sits there behind a computer, pretending to be an underage person looking for thrills. And pedophiles come to New Hampshire, and then they're arrested if they're doing something improper. If the word becomes out that New Hampshire is the state in the country that will not be able to effectively use internet crimes against exploited children databases, then this is going to be the prime destination for pedophiles to come and operate. And I would note that I was asked to work on this bill after the last one with this amendment was defeated in the House and the judiciary. And when I put together the original HB 499, I modeled it on proposed bipartisan legislation in Congress. There's a bill that Senator Coons on one side and Senator Lee on the other side have jointly sponsored. Nothing goes through the Senate, so I don't know what the status is now. It was supported by groups such as Americans for Prosperity and others based on certain principles. One, there should be guidelines and guardrails on the use of facial recognition technology. I think we all agree on that. Second, the persistent and targeted use of this technology should be subject to similar procedural guidelines as other investigative techniques that raise similar privacy concerns. This bill would require, the original bill would require law enforcement to obtain a warrant in order to use facial recognition technology to conduct ongoing targeted surveillance. And under a warrant, it couldn't exceed more than 72 hours. It could only be of a specific person. A surveillance of a group would require a different warrant. And facial recognition technology is barred without a warrant after the person has been identified, and there is a exclusion for exigent circumstances. That's the original bill. That's the bill outline that's been working its way through Congress, and that protects our privacy. It requires a warrant, and it doesn't handcuff the police in terms of prosecuting sexual offenses against minors. So it's a balanced bill. And there's one last thing I would note. If this bill passes in its current form, it's my belief that any pending criminal prosecution of pedophiles in New Hampshire, based on use of facial recognition techniques, which will be most of them, would have to be dismissed. And I urge this committee to reject the amendment, pass the original bill, and I think the public would be well served by doing so. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Representative. Are there any questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much, Representative.
And I will see you this afternoon. Take care.
Take care, Representative. Next,
I
yes,
see Representative Roy with his hand raised. Did you want to go to him first?
I do not have him signed up to speak, but since he is a representative, we will extend that courtesy. So yes, why don't we go to him?
Thank you, Senator Carson. I am a member of House eDNA. And I just wanted to add a little perspective, if I could, to the testimony we've heard thus far. I would start by saying, first of all, with regard to the last comment about cases being dismissed, the law does not have a retroactive application, and that's simply not the case. They would not have to be dismissed. Second of all, what we're talking about is querying a database. We're not talking about, when we talk about getting warrants, if the police, for example, found a computer as part of another investigation that had images on it. First of all, the perpetrator, they know who he is because they have his computer. The question is now whether they can query a database with images found on the computer. Now, to do that, they would need a warrant, but they'd already have a warrant to search the computer in the first place. Second of all, this bar we're talking about is probable cause, and in layman's terms, that means more likely than not. I was a law enforcement officer and I have obtained warrants, and you can do so. I've gotten warrants in the middle of the night, 3 a.m. I've woken up a clerk and he goes over the affidavit. It takes about 15 minutes. But let's just be generous and say it might take an hour. If you're in an investigation like that, an hour is not a lot of time to obtain a search warrant to query these databases. And let's remember, that's what this is for. It's about either surveilling somebody by keeping watch on them where they go based on their face, or by querying a database of faces to see if that person, if you can identify that person. So I just don't feel like getting a warrant is a high bar when you're in the middle of an investigation. And if it's an exigent circumstance, judges do respond quickly. And if you can't meet the simple basis of more likely than not, then frankly, you shouldn't be able to get a warrant to just pop people's faces into this database and look and see who they are. With regard to questions about whether this happened in New Hampshire yet, I don't recall any testimony at the hearing, but I feel like it's our job to stay ahead of these technologies and not be reactive to them. Technology is advancing at such a quick pace, it's difficult to keep up with. And for us to be able to get ahead of it, I think is an important step. I mean, we just passed a constitutional amendment in New Hampshire that indicated how valuable privacy is to the citizens in New Hampshire. So all we're doing is putting guardrails in place. All we're doing is asking that the police do their job, get a search warrant before querying these databases, before plugging people into these computers that, as the previous witness testified, Interpol. I mean, this is the whole world we're talking about. And New Hampshire citizens want to know that at least a judge has put eyes on it before their image is compared to some database that goes around the world. And I just don't feel like it's a very high bar at all to do that. So I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Representative. Are there any questions from the committee? Senator Prentice?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Representative Roy. Same question I asked Representative Smith. The timing on getting a warrant, do you know what it is?
As I just said, it can be anywhere from minutes and, being generous, an hour. There are judges that are on call 24 hours a day. It's a matter of how long it takes you to type the affidavit for the search warrant and go over it with the judge. It's not a long time at all. And if you have a solid case where you've laid out your probable cause, it'll go a lot faster. If you're on a fishing expedition, absolutely, it could take a lot longer. They could push back and the judge will tell you what you need. They don't just say this is inadequate, go away. They say, well, you haven't made probable cause because you don't have A, B, and C. So it's a collaborative process between the judicial system and the executive branch, trying to get what they need while protecting people's rights. So as I said, it could be a matter of minutes if the court is open, up to an hour at night, but there are judges available all the time.
Dr. Carson, follow up?
Yes.
Thank you, Representative Roy, and I'm sorry if I missed your description of the timing. So here's just a question that I have. If you have somebody who, you have probable cause, you're going to get a warrant, and then you're going to scan their face versus scanning their face and knowing that there's a problem. I mean, you're just trying to separate the two of these out, but it could delay potentially somebody who, if it was just done immediately, we would already know that this is a, a problematic case. So I'm just trying, I'm all for the privacy part of this, but I'm trying to understand, like, I feel like it may defeat the purpose to wait to do this versus doing it automatically. And then knowing you might be in a problem zone. People do get picked up by law enforcement. We know this, that are, they've picked up the wrong person before. So that wouldn't be any different. It's what they do after that to make sure everybody's treated appropriately. So I'm trying to understand how this is just scanning them and knowing that they may be bad or have this history, how that is problematic or invading someone's privacy. I'm just trying to advance this as we go through the hearing this morning. So hopefully you could follow me. And again, I'm sorry I missed your description on the time before.
Oh, no worries. And that's a good question. I guess it's difficult to use an analogy because it's a new technology, but I guess I would say it would be much easier to be able to search a person's car or search their home or do any of these things without a warrant. And then once you realize that they are a criminal, to go ahead and get the warrant to further search. I would say that I can't envision a scenario where it was so emergent that you run someone's face through a facial technology system that you don't have, an hour to get a warrant. I can't even think of a scenario where that would happen, where they would remember all we're doing is saying you have to get a warrant to run the person's face through the technology system. And if you don't have probable cause, which is, again, in layman's terms, just a standard of more likely than not that this person is involved in a crime or has committed a crime, or that the image you have is fruit of a crime, then maybe you need to develop your case more. But to just cast out a fishing net and say, this is suspicious, I want to check this and run this person through Interpol. We haven't discussed is, well, what kind of a fingerprint does that leave that person's been put through there? Is there now a flag on that person that they've been run before? I know when you stop somebody and you in a motor vehicle, and nothing comes to the stop, there's still a record that person has been stopped. So when the next town over pulls them over, they see, hey, this guy's been stopped just last week. And that may or may not influence an officer's decision on how to proceed. So once we put someone into the system, even if it's just a query, are they there forever? We have no control over that. Interpol, we don't know what their rules are. We don't know, you know what I'm saying? I feel like it's a brand new area of technology, and the best thing we can do is put some safeguards in now. And if it turns out that, this is too stringent, and there's another way of doing it without violating people's rights, we can amend it. But I feel like we should always err on the side of protecting people's rights whenever possible. And I'm certainly concerned about the use of minors being trafficked. As far as these sexual predators go, again, if you get an image on a computer, you know who the perpetrator is, and if you look at the image and it's more likely than not that person is a minor, I can't imagine a judge saying, no, you may not run that picture through facial recognition. And that's all we're asking. The police already have the pictures, otherwise they wouldn't be running that. We're not asking them to get a warrant to obtain pictures that they've already obtained. I mean, either they got a warrant to obtain the pictures in the first place, or they were part of an investigation where they were sent to them as part of a sting operation. So they've got these pictures, and if they have the proper context and foundation for having the pictures in the first place, I cannot imagine a court is going to say, no, you may not query the database, because that's all we're asking the court to do, approve the querying of the database with the picture. And I don't know what repercussions that would have for a citizen once their picture's been uploaded to this database to be queried. So it's very concerning. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, follow up, please.
Thank you, Senator Carson. And again, thank you, Representative Roy. You did. So what is the difference between so if we didn't have facial recognition, but there was probable cause and the police, well, let's say they pull a car over and they run their plate and they go through the NCIC system. So they're going to have their driver's history, but they'll also, if there's, say, a warrant for their arrest, or there's also a way to advance that to get more of a criminal history. Is there anything different? This is where I'm going to show you that I'm not totally shored up on facial recognition. Is there anything different that we're going to know from facial recognition from what we can already get when we pull them over? Or is it just that it may extend outside of the United States? Like, I'm just trying to understand, like, if we're going to delay using facial recognition, which I think the piece of this that's key from a public safety perspective is that, this tells you right away that there's an issue versus, all right, we're going to go get a warrant and then scan a picture where we might already have that information at our fingertips.
So there's the main difference is one, with your first scenario with the running of the plate and the finding out things, you know who you're dealing with. With the facial recognition, presumptively, the only reason you're running it is because you don't know who the person is. And there's two aspects to this bill. There's the, querying the database for a picture you have, and then there's the ongoing surveillance. So if I want to surveil you, currently, there's no law prohibiting me from putting your picture into a system where every time you popped up on a camera, it told me where you are. So if I was surveilling you and you went to the bank and the bank system was linked and you went to an ATM and then you walked by a security, you went into a federal building, every time your picture was taken on there, I'd be able to know where you were throughout the day and follow you. So this bill would say, no, you have to get a search warrant before you can do that. And you have to have probable cause to surveil a senator. So that's the first aspect. The next aspect is querying a database to see if you can determine who this person is. And again, if you've already got the picture and you have reason to believe that the picture is the fruit of a crime or the person has been involved in a crime, you should be able to articulate that and get a warrant to query that database for that person. If you are just fishing and you don't know who it is, or you don't have any reason to want to run, but you just figure you want to run it, yeah, that's going to get denied, and it should, rightly so. So the delay we're talking about really is slowing them down from following you around and from popping your face into a unknown database with, we don't know what the repercussions of that are, and getting a response as to who you are. We should at least have a threshold basis for wanting to make that query, and we should be able to articulate it to the court.
Okay. Are there any further questions for Representative Roy?
Thank you, Representative Roy. I'm all set. Thank you, Senator Carson.
Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much, Representative.
Thank you for giving me the time to speak. I appreciate it.
Next, we're going to go to Sarah Chu.
Ms. Shu, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So thank you so much, Chair Carson, honorable members of the Senate Executive Departments and Administration Committee for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Sarah Chu, and I am coming to you from a construction zone, so please excuse my background noise here. I'm the Senior Advisor on Forensic Science Policy at the Innocence Project. I come to this work as a scientist, and I'm tasked with policy work that focuses on improving the valid, reliable, and just application of forensic science methods and police technologies to both prevent wrongful convictions and strengthen investigations. We respectfully submit this testimony in support of HB 499 as amended as a starting point for facial recognition technology regulation. We recognize that without HB 499, facial recognition in all its forms, as Representative Roy described, would proceed unregulated in New Hampshire. We urge the committee to continue its deliberations and further enhance this legislation in the future to assure that this technology is appropriately limited and that its implementation acknowledges scientific, privacy, surveillance, and racial justice risks it poses. Scientific testing of facial recognition has proven its lack of reliability, so much so that the National Police of Scotland and Axon, the company that makes body cameras, have declined to integrate facial recognition into their technologies. In addition to questions of science, we also need to consider the ethical, legal, and social implications of this technology. So key questions on how equitably facial recognition can be implemented include the database it uses, the level of transparency and accountability that comes with their use, how they impact civil liberties. And there's a very real concern that the use of facial recognition could violate the Granite State's constitutional amendment, Concurrent Resolution 16, that Senator Carson and the Representative Smith and Roy have raised. Because this conversation is so complex, it's so technical, and it engages a discussion of our values, which is so critical, the Innocence Project recommends that the legislature convene an advisory group of practitioners, researchers, community stakeholders, which include impacted communities, to help deliberate and explore these complicated issues. Powerful technologies require equally powerful oversight to ensure their responsible use. The regulation we're seeking prevents government expansion and government intrusion while ensuring that Granite Staters can enjoy public safety, privacy, and equity. The Innocence Project acknowledges the legislature's interest in establishing a regulatory framework and look forward to future discussions about how to expand this framework in a way that more reliably prevents wrongful suspicion of innocent people, safeguards rights to privacy, and holds the government accountable to its limited and transparent use. And I'd welcome questions about the NIST study, about other states that may have passed facial recognition bills, and the importance of warrants to understanding wrongful identifications. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Ms. Chu. Are there any questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we're going to go to Albert Scher.
Mr. Scher, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I know some of you are familiar with me, and others, this is a first-time encounter. I'll be very brief about my background. I'm a professor at UNH Law. I've been here for 27 years. Prior to that, I worked for 13 years as a public defender in New Hampshire. My focus in my work with senators and representatives has been on privacy in New Hampshire and on criminal justice reform. I worked very closely with then Representative Neil Kirk on the newly minted constitutional amendment on information privacy. So this is an area I research in, I write in. I also served, for what it's worth, on Portsmouth Police Commission's subcommittee on body cameras, where issues like this were discussed. I am in support of HB 499. Let me give you a slightly different perspective. The broader issue, I think, at play here is to what extent do we have privacy when we're in public? That's a developing issue around the country in a lot of different contexts. The U.S. Supreme Court has started to take that on in the context of the Fourth Amendment and said, when the police put a GPS on the bottom of a car, they put it on the bottom of a car in a public place and follow that car around for 10 days and gather a wealth of locational information, even though that's behavior that they could have done the old-fashioned way and just had a police officer follow them around in a car. To put a GPS on the bottom of a car, even though the car was in a public place, the GPS didn't even enter the car. The U.S. Supreme Court has said they need a search warrant to do that. So, that's a clear statement that the U.S. Supreme Court is concerned about. It wants to say, you go into public, you are not giving up all your privacy. And I think, though not a perfect analogy to facial recognition technology, that's an important piece of this that I think is that we need to consider. We know several things about facial recognition technology. We know it's not yet reliable. It's not, it's a not ready for prime time technology yet. Ms. Chu mentioned Axon Corporation. They are the leading provider of body cams to police departments around the country. They have a science and ethics board that deals with difficult issues like the use of facial recognition technology. That board recommended to Axon Corporation that they not accompany their body cam technology with facial recognition technology. Understand, and because of its lack of reliability at this point, understand what is being said by that decision by Axon. We are making a business decision that we're so concerned about facial recognition technology right now that we're not gonna choose to make money off of it. That's what they've said. So there's a very legitimate reliability issue there. I talked about the privacy in public issue. None of us want the sense that a police department could, see a face and find out who that person is by scanning a database and then following that person around the rest of the day. We see this face in Manchester. Let's put it through the database. Oh, that's Senator Kavanaugh. Let's follow Senator Kavanaugh around today and see what he does all today. I mean, that's the outside extreme risk of facial recognition technology that none of us want. I'm not suggesting that's going on now, but the point is facial recognition technology can be a very valuable investigative tool. We don't want to impede its use as an investigative tool. But what this legislation does is it draws a compromise between the issue of privacy in public, the issue of just being surveilled without knowing it, and the value of the investigative tool. To address Senator Prentice's comment, several questions, and I appreciate Senator Prentice's concern. I know I have the deepest respect for Representative Birch. I've worked with him closely on any number of issues. He practiced in Vermont for 30 years. I practiced in New Hampshire for 13 years. I don't know what the warrant issuance system is like in Vermont. It's a very rural state, and I would wager things have moved slowly when he was practicing, slower when he was practicing in Vermont than in New Hampshire. You can get a warrant very quickly. There is technology already being, I believe, already being implemented that police can now use a smartphone to get a warrant. They don't have to show up in court. That's being worked on. I know there's legislation about a piece of that that's being worked on. So this issue of delay, I think, to be honest with you, is a non-issue for that reason and for one other reason. If it's a circumstance where you want to scan the database really quickly because there's an emergency and because, for example, a child has been abducted and you have a picture of the person, the abductor, the exigent circumstances exception to the warrant requirement will apply. Every judge will recognize that after the fact. So this issue of delay, with all due respect to Representative Birch, is a non-issue. In every other circumstance, the police get a search warrant supported by probable cause, unless it's an emergency, and then they can use the exigent circumstances exception. I'm trying to see if I can shorten what I'm talking about. I have the disability of being a law professor who gets paid to talk at great length, so I'm trying to restrain myself. The issue, again, with greatest of respect for Representative Birch, I think he's just over the top in his description of the risks of sexual predators. One, the last thing he said, that all pending sexual predator prosecutions that use facial recognition technology would have to be thrown out, is just flat wrong. Representative Roy was exactly right. This is not retroactive legislation. So that's not going to happen. Number two, if you have a picture of a victim of child sexual abuse or sex trafficking, and that victim appears more likely than not to be a minor, every judge I've ever practiced in front of will give you a warrant. It's just the case. If you have a picture on the internet of an individual who is engaging in sexual intercourse of some sort with somebody who appears to be a minor, every judge I know or have ever practiced in front of will give you a warrant to scan both of those faces. It doesn't get in the way of dealing with the really serious issue of sex trafficking. It doesn't get in the way of dealing with child abductions. It doesn't get in the way of trying to locate missing persons. The combination of the ease in getting warrants and the use of a exigent circumstances exception when there's emergency will cover all those circumstances. I think this bill really is a very thoughtful compromise to the interest of law enforcement to use this newfangled investigative tool, which still has some issues, but I think we need to start to regulate it now and to protect people's privacy. With that, I'm more than willing to entertain questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony this morning, Mr. Scher. Are there any questions from the committee? Senator Ricciardi.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your testimony. I was wondering, is there any other circumstances in which a warrant would be required for a law enforcement agency to search records that the agency creates and maintains?
Yeah, it depends on the circumstance. Right now, the technology, the database that the state has is primarily its driver's license database, and that that is a part of this legislation, that they can't use the driver's license database. So it depends who's in possession of those records. If they're searching records they have from a database about somebody's genetic profile, they may well have to get a search warrant to search that database. It really is going to depend on the circumstance. So yes, there are circumstances where that's the case.
Follow up?
Yes.
Mhm.
Thank you. You had mentioned the inaccuracies, but as much as I hate to point this out, I had read that the FBI was able, through facial recognition, to secure the criminals that were part of the January 6th insurgents that actually, cost the life of a police officer. So it was clearly accurate there. Well,
it depends on who they're, number one, it depends on who they're tracking. It can be reliable and it can be unreliable. I don't think anyone would say it's absolutely unreliable in every circumstance. And I don't think anyone would say it's absolutely reliable. In the circumstance of January 6th, they had a circumstance. It's unclear from the public record whether they got warrants and what the requirements were. But in every circumstance of searching for who those people are, they have unknown individuals who they know are committing crimes. They're trespassing on government property. In every one of those circumstances, they would be able to get a search warrant easily. So there's nothing about this legislation that would have impeded whatsoever searching people in databases to figure out who those January 6th people were. This legislation would not get in the way of what was happening there at all. Let me add, in terms of reliability, one more point. A nonprofit organization did an experiment using a very expansive and large public database and ran members of Congress through that database. I think it was either 23 or 32 members of Congress were identified as criminals incorrectly in that well-regulated experiment. So, I think what I am saying is we need to be cautious. We need to take advantage of this tool. And this legislation is a very common sense compromise as to how to meet the privacy interests and the needs of police and investigating.
Are there any further questions for Mr. Sheriff? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Next, we're going to go to Brian Levesque.
Senator Carson, I don't see Brian on the list of attendees, but Brian, if you're here, could you please raise your hand? I don't see any hands raised.
Okay, next, then we're going to go to Jake Parker.
Mr. Parker, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hi, Jake Parker here with the Security Industry Association, which represents companies providing safety and security products in New Hampshire and nationwide. Our members include most of the leading developers of facial recognition in the US. We support addressing concerns about the technology with policies ensuring it's used appropriately. But instead of doing that, the bill as passed by the House would ban any public sector use of facial recognition outside criminal investigations, and regardless of the type of application or benefit, due to the requirement that stated that you have to have a search warrant in order to use the technology. So contrary to what we heard earlier, I mean, this is a pretty significant restriction. You know, in the types of uses that would be prohibited include those that have nothing to do with policing or law enforcement, such as identity verification for secure access to protected spaces, networks, and services, or even access to government-issued electronic devices. There's been a lot of discussion about the search warrant requirement. I just wanted to point out, first of all, that there is no distinction in the bill as passed by the House between surveillance type uses of facial recognition and more routine identification uses that we see in law enforcement, even though that was something that was featured in the earlier version of the bill. But the search warrant requirement is in the version passed by the House. I believe this conflicts with the existing requirements in New Hampshire and also imposes conditions that cannot realistically be met given how the technology is normally used by law enforcement, which is at the beginning stages of an investigation involving an image of a person where their identity is unknown. So typically this is used to compare against mugshot databases that a department may hold itself or is held regionally, or other publicly available information. So this creates a strange situation where a warrant may be required for a department to search its own records that it maintains and creates. It also would require a warrant for one method of searching this data, but not others. So law enforcement agencies every day search these records by physical traits to meet subject descriptions such as race and gender, as well as arrest history. And use of facial recognition provides simply a quicker and more accurate way of doing that. So also as mentioned by Representative Birch, there are no exceptions to prohibitions that would allow use to address imminent threats, public safety emergencies, is also to help rescue missing children and sex trafficking victims. And there was a lengthy discussion about that earlier. This has been a success story for using the technology. We know that 15,000 children have been rescued from human trafficking in just the last 4 years using similar tools. And this, I think the warrant requirement is problematic in these cases where you are looking to identify the victims of a crime or identification for other purposes that are not directly related to where a crime is known to have occurred, such as identifying deceased persons. So additionally, the justification is based in part on misconceptions about the accuracy and performance of the technology. And I'll just point out the so-called study mentioned earlier that misidentified members of Congress was not a scientific study at all. And the scientific authority we have on this is the National Institutes of Standards and Technology, which is mentioned earlier. We believe that the blanket prohibition on facial recognition as imposed by the current version of the bill would actually preclude the opportunity to develop more responsible policies that could both limit the potential uses of concern and preserve the benefit it provides, which is something we would support. We strongly urge the committee not to approve this legislation in its current form. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Mr. Parker. Are there any questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none, thank you. And next we will go to Ross Connolly.
Mr. Connolly, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee for holding this hearing today. For the record, my name is Ross Connolly, the Deputy State Director for Americans for Prosperity in New Hampshire. And I'm here today to voice our support for the original version of HB 499. We are in support of the amended version as well, but considering a lot of the testimony, the original version does have an additional provision that has some more restrictions and gives more leeway to law enforcement. We believe that facial recognition technology can be a powerful tool to identify suspects, find missing persons, and solve crimes. But in a number of cases, the technology has been used improperly by law enforcement in other jurisdictions, like being used as the sole rationale for an arrest or without meaningful human review. This technology also raises the possibility of creating a panopticon of continuous surveillance of individuals or groups in public spaces. The original version of HB 499 struck a regulatory balance by allowing state law enforcement to access this emerging technology, but required them to receive a court order before they engage in ongoing surveillance, which is defined as a time greater than 72 hours. The legislation also allows law enforcement to use this technology if there are emergency circumstances, which is a natural extension of existing evidentiary common law. And HB 499 would be an important first step in creating proper guardrails for this technology. Currently, there's really no guardrails in how this can be used. So there is more to be done. State and local law enforcement should create and publish guidelines for how they will use this technology in the future in circumstances that are not considered by this legislation to ensure it is non-discriminatory and not the sole basis for an arrest. And for these reasons, we urge you to support HB 499. And I'd be happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Mr. Connolly. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony this morning.
Thank you.
Aaron, are there any folks with their hands raised?
Carson, actually, there is someone. It looks like Bedford, New Hampshire Police.
Okay, all right, let's put them through.
Yes, good morning, Madam Chair. My name is John
Good morning.
Brofosky. I'm the Chief of Police here in Bedford, New Hampshire. And thank you for allowing me, representing the New Hampshire Association of Chiefs of Police, to provide testimony with respect to HB 499 this morning. Just by way of background, I've been in continuous law enforcement service for almost 43 years. I've been the chief coming up on 10 years here in Bedford, 27 years as a federal agent with the United States Drug Enforcement Administration, and then prior to that, a police officer and detective in the city in Connecticut. The New Hampshire Association of Chiefs of Police are opposed to this legislation, and it's been variously described this morning by proponents as a guardrail. In fact, the Chiefs of Police Association and others perceive this bill not as a guardrail, but a roadblock that would preclude the use of technology by law enforcement and other state agencies as a tool to protect the citizens of the granted state. First and foremost, there's also been some testimony with respect to the efficacy, the timeliness of getting warrants. And frankly, I'm perplexed as to the esteemed testimony of prior people who may not be currently engaged in getting warrants in the state of New Hampshire. My detectives and police officers are every day. And let me tell you, Madam Chair and members of the committee, that this is not a process that takes minutes. It takes hours and hours and sometimes days. With the dearth of the number of judges available to us, because the number of members of the judiciary and the state are declining, it's becoming increasingly more difficult to find an available judge. But even if we do, the time it takes to prepare an adequate warrant to appear before a judge, despite the use of technology, is not a matter of minutes. It takes hours and hours, even in the most routine cases. So I dispute distinctly and definitively the notion that getting a warrant is something that can be done in a timely manner. Without the explicit exception for exigency, it becomes a legal challenge for the use of any derivative evidence that might be obtained in an emergent situation. God forbid, in New Hampshire, in the Granite State, a terrorist-related or extremist-related situation in which it was necessary to identify individuals who are unknown to law enforcement, to determine where they are, who they are, and what they might be up to in terms of harming other individuals in the future, such as what the FBI has been using effectively to identify unknown individuals who invaded the United States Capitol on January 6th of this year. It's incredibly important to recognize that the warrant requirement as it exists today is a requirement for law enforcement to provide particularized information to the magistrate judge of a particular thing or place to be searched of and for. In the case of use of facial recognition technology, it is used not to arrest individuals. It is used to identify leads, investigative leads in cases where the individuals are unknown. It's used effectively to identify victims of crime, such was identified in previous testimony, particularly with respect to the use of the technology to identify victims of child pornography and human sex trafficking. The way that this bill is currently constructed, it would effectively block the use of the technology in those aspects. More importantly, it's effectively used oftentimes to identify victims of crime beyond human sex trafficking and child exploitation, but also particularly used here even in a case in Bedford, identifying the victims of lost, what we call a silver alert here in New Hampshire, and in law enforcement, of elderly people that went missing and was used by another state police department in the Northeast to identify where those individuals were, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles away, that eventually resulted in their rescue. It's not used for the identification of suspects. It's used to identify victims and to assist law enforcement. And the way that this bill is constructed would effectively roadblock that particular use of the technology. And as previously mentioned by the esteemed senator, that the National Institute of Science and Technology determined that there are applications in use today that are 99% or greater accurate. Again, these are not used. There is human intervention once facial recognition technology is applied to determine whether or not that individual is in fact a suspect of a crime, which is when the warrant would be obtained. Having to obtain a warrant prior to even use the technology effectively kills the opportunity to use a warrant, to use the technology, because we don't know what we're looking for. We're trying to identify individuals that are involved in a crime. So it's a misuse and misrepresentation of the warrant requirement. And the presumption that it would be misused here in New Hampshire exudes the notion that people already may not understand the rigorous the rigorous and appropriate guidelines that New Hampshire law enforcement already use today to obtain warrants to bring people before the court. So the New Hampshire Association of Chiefs of Police is opposed to this bill as written. We recognize the need for appropriate guidelines with respect to the application of facial recognition technology. This bill does not do that. It effectively blocks it permanently. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd be willing to take questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony this morning, Chief. Are there any questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. Aaron, is there anyone else?
I do see Representative Roy with his hand raised.
Okay, all right, put him through.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
Representative, just let me say something here. We're not going to do a back and forth. So if you have something new that you would like to add to your testimony, that would be terrific.
Yes, absolutely. I'm not going to respond to anyone who's testified, just to questions that were raised by the senators earlier. One, there was a question raised regarding law enforcement required to use a warrant to get information that they already possessed. I would point to the federal government and the NSA, who has metadata on every phone call, text message, and email sent in the United States. They're not able to query that without a warrant, be it from a FISA court or from somewhere else. They possess all this information and they cannot access it for criminal purposes without that. And I also wanted to remind everyone that in cases of terrorism or anything like that, where we need to identify people, this only affects New Hampshire law enforcement, and terrorism or anything of that nature is a federal offense. And this legislation would not in any way affect the ability of the federal, the FBI, the ATF, or any of the other agencies to access their databases and do what they need to do as part of their investigation. This is strictly to New Hampshire. Thank you.
Representative Roy?
Yes.
Okay, please continue.
That was all I had to say. Sorry, I got interrupted by my masters.
That's okay. Are there any questions for Representative Roy? Okay, seeing none, thank you again. Okay, Aaron, is that it?
That is.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing on House Bill 499. Okay, we're going to just keep moving here. I'm going to go ahead and open the public hearing on House Bill 128. And I see the prime sponsor, Representative Aaron, has signed up to speak. Good morning, Representative, and thank you for waiting.
Yes, good morning, and thank you, executive departments and administrative committee members. My name is Judy Aaron, Representative Judy Aaron, and I represent Sullivan 7, Eckworth, Goshen, Langdon, Leominster, and Washington. And the bill that, I hope you can hear me well, by the way.
Yes, we can.
Okay, the bill that I'm presenting to you today adds a public notification element to Chapter 12-F, Section 12-F:1, which is a statute regarding weather modification experimentation that has been on the books since 1953. The statute itself was last recodified in 1985, and to anyone's knowledge has never been used. The current statute allows for departments of and agencies within the state of New Hampshire, and with approval by the governor and the executive council, to perform weather modification experiments alone or in conjunction with the federal government and or other states. There's no current mechanism other than the usual public notice of executive council meetings and agendas to let the public know what type of weather experimentation or modification might be proposed or planned by agencies or departments in our state and brought before the executive council and the governor. Repeal of the current statute was attempted in 2013 in the House Science and Technology Committee. It failed then because they felt no value in removing it from statute. And if you recall, I came before this very committee last year with a repeal bill. And thanks to you, I came to wisely understand that repeal meant that statutes would remain totally silent on the issue, which was not a desired consequence either. So here I am today with an addition to the statute to put in place public notification, which I believe is to be necessary and important. With this House bill, I'm asking that we put in place the following. At least 2 months prior to presentation to the governor and executive council for approval of any weather modification experimentation plan, that there be public notice in at least 4 newspapers within the state, as well as posting on state department or agencies' internet websites, the proposed date and type of weather modification experimentation that is being planned. I'm also seeking to have disclosure made to the public regarding what chemical compounds and technologies will be used. Disclosure would also state what possible effects the experimentation might have on human health, as well as the effects on wildlife and wildlife habitats. I'm also seeking the disclosure of the funding source of the experimentation project. And I'd also like to see the agencies involved solicit the public for input regarding the proposed weather modification experimentation program. I believe that all of this information is important to be disclosed to the public, especially as it may alter the weather and possibly release compounds into the air that we breathe. We should be made aware of these experimental events and have an understanding of its possible impact, so that the public should also be able to comment and voice their approval or objections. In the current statute, there's no mention or limitation of what types of experiments could be performed. Experimentation could result in some pretty devastating health and ecological fallout, and I have many reservations regarding the statute as it stands today. But while it hasn't seemed to be a bother being in place for all this time, its potential is disturbing without some sort of public notification included. There's no mention of having proposals of weather modification experimentation coming to a vote or approval from the New Hampshire citizens. There's no mention of limitation of what types of experiments could be performed, and there's no guarantee of safety to our state ecology or population. There's no mention of the liability our state would have with neighboring states and what problems this could cause our agricultural community or our watersheds. Most people in New Hampshire have no idea that this current statute even exists. And this is why I'd like to at least add a public notification element to current statute, so that if plans for weather experimentation are proposed, then at least the citizens of our state can be informed about them ahead of time and have an opportunity to comment. There are many articles and websites which discuss the ability of man to control weather, especially in these times when we are concerned about changes in our climate and our weather patterns. I'm no scientist, but in reading up on the subject, more and more scientists agree that controlling the weather is nearly impossible because of the huge list of variables involved. However, across the country and for a long time, there's been experimentation going on in small and large scale, with some that the public is aware of and some not. The truth is that despite experiments and studies over the decades, it's still challenging to carry out such controlled experiments and difficult to ascertain if they will actually work. The jury is still out on whether or not these experiments are favorable to the planet or can create undesirable effects in the long term. No one is really sure what releasing various chemicals into the air will do to everything below, or if there are long-term consequences. And it might be well to note that our New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services has no permitting requirements in place for weather modification experimentation. Perhaps as a legislature, we should look into that at some point, since there may or may not be only state agencies or departments thinking about weather modification experimentation, but private businesses as well. So in closing in my statements this morning, the statute that we currently have is very broad and gives carte blanche to the state on this issue of weather experimentation. And I'm not convinced that allowing departments and agencies in our state to have unfettered ability to do weather modification experiments in the skies over New Hampshire is a good or safe thing. We should, at the very least, insert public notification and input into the process. So I appreciate you listening to my comments and my these opening remarks. And I thank you for your consideration. I hope that you pass this important legislation through your Senate committee and through the Senate. Thank you very much, and I'm open to any of your questions.
Thank you very much, Representative. Are there any questions for Representative Aaron? Okay, seeing none, I would just like to say thank you, Representative Aaron. You are exactly correct. We did have this bill the last biennium, and you heard the committee very clearly that you know what we were looking for, and I would just like to thank you for that. And we look forward to having a discussion about your bill.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I thank you very much because, you know, granted, I was a freshman legislator, and you taught me a lot about consequences of repealing legislation, and I appreciate the lesson that you taught me.
Thank you, Representative. This is a collaborative process.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you again. Aaron, is there anyone else who in the waiting room who would like to speak?
It looks like Amy Vickers.
Okay, let's put Ms. Vickers through.
Yes, hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you, Senator Carson and other senators and listeners. I did submit written testimony, which I emailed in last night. So I'll be brief in my remarks. Just want to say a little bit of background. I think this is the third time I've spoken before the legislature in support of the bill HB 128. My name is Amy Vickers. I'm an engineer, author and consultant. I have a consulting practice based in Amherst, Massachusetts. It specializes in water conservation, drought management, and water planning. And I work all over the country. I'm a New Englander, but I've worked in, across the country and overseas, helping water systems manage their infrastructure more efficiently, manage drought. I've also worked on several policy initiatives related to water conservation on the state and federal level. Briefly, water modification is a growing practice in the United States. It's really been around since at least the 1940s. And it's necessary in some cases, in my view, when we have severe drought problems. For example, right now in the Western United States, I believe there are at least 8 states involved in some type of cloud seeding because of the severe drought and water shortage conditions. This is something that, in my view, should be used only when necessary. It can be very beneficial, but at the same time, there's some risks associated and costs with weather modification. And as much as it's an emerging science, it's not perfect. And it sometimes has some unintended consequences, which is why I think HB 128 is so important, and I encourage you to pass it. Again, many benefits to weather modification, but I want to outline just 3 key risks and costs associated, which I think bill HB 128 helps address. As Representative Aaron pointed out, there are chemicals used in weather modification. We don't know how they impact human health, but if we look at the practices, for example, of the New Hampshire Division of Pesticides and their procedures for using chemicals and sprays to deal with, let's say, mosquito outbreaks or West Nile outbreaks, the public is notified. No one likes pesticides, but there are indeed situations where we've got to use them to protect public health. But when we do use them, for example, the New Hampshire Division of Pesticides makes it known to the public what chemicals are going to be used, and they advise the public to, while we're spraying, encourage you to stay indoors, close windows, keep children's toys out of the yard, etc., just so these chemicals do not get on you directly. And that's a good example, and I think a lot of corollaries to what HB 128 is calling for. Here's public notification, so the public is notified about what's going to happen, and again, they can protect themselves and avoid potential harm. If you look at the historic record on the use of cloud seeding to enhance water supplies, unfortunately, there are some examples where it has caused damage. There have been actually lawsuits by farmers in some cases arguing that the cloud seeding activities missed their mark, flooded farms, and caused significant losses to crops, livestock, and other damages. I think with a public notification process, such as what you're calling for in HB 128, farmers, businesses, etc., would know in advance of potential risks of cloud seeding events, and they could take actions to protect themselves. So, for example, if they know there's a cloud seeding event going to happen, let's say north of them, even though it's unlikely it would affect their area, just in case if there are unexpected winds, farmers can adjust their livestock management and their irrigation schedules just to minimize any potential for harm. The other potential risks associated with cloud seeding and weather modification is public safety. In that similar kind of example, just envision if there was a severe drought in southern New Hampshire and the state decided we're going to do some cloud seeding to help fill declining public drinking water reservoirs. And again, that may be necessary at some point in the future, given current trends. In such an instance, again, we're dealing with a science that isn't perfect. If there were unexpected winds, or conditions that occurred that could potentially bring rain to the north. Excuse me one second, a little more water. In such a situation, if there were unexpected winds and the cloud seeding event that was intended for southern New Hampshire actually hit the northern part of the state where the White Mountains are, for example, in the summertime, you could potentially have heavy rains and deluges of rains that could affect hikers and tourists up in that area. My understanding is the White Mountains get over 250,000 visitors and tourists every summer. So you've got a lot of people potentially who could be impacted by this. And again, going back to the historical record, there have been, unfortunately, they're rare, but examples of floods and deaths and significant property damage associated with cloud seeding events that hit areas that were not intended. So, you know, with those three examples, I think we see is that the value of public notification protects the public, protects businesses, farms, and I would say also the government from potential liability. That everyone is notified of what's going on and what to expect with, for example, the cloud seeding event. So just in closing, weather modification, again, it can be a useful tool, but it's also a responsibility that needs to be used carefully and with the public's full knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony this morning. Are there any questions for Ms. Vickers? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much for your testimony, Ms. Vickers.
Thank you.
Aaron, is there anyone else?
I don't see anyone else signed up to speak or with their hands raised.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and close the public hearing on House Bill 128. Next, we're going to open the public hearing on House Bill 190 and recognize the prime sponsor, Representative Gordon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members
Good
of the
morning.
committee.
Good morning, Representative.
Good morning. I am Ned Gordon. I represent District 9 in Grafton County, but more importantly today, I'm appearing as the chair of the Joint Legislative Ethics Committee. And I am the prime sponsor of House Bill 190. It's a very simple bill. I think you'll find it less complicated than much of the other legislation you've heard about this morning. Currently, legislators are required to file a financial disclosure form, and they're required to file that each and every year by the third Friday in January. And it's an important form in that it provides public disclosure so that the public can determine whether legislators have potential conflicts. And our ethics guidelines do emphasize disclosure. But we're required to file it every year. And it is a form which is, in terms of its filing, an inconvenient form for many. We have very difficulty catching up with all the legislators to file the forms. And we've discovered that, and there is also a continuing obligation on the part of every legislator to update the form if in fact their circumstances change. And so they have that ongoing responsibility or duty in any event. And what this bill does is say that instead of filing each and every year, that legislators would file it only at the beginning of each legislative session. So instead of doing it every year, it would be for legislators who continue to serve every other year or at the beginning of each session. We feel that the inconvenience outweighs the potential value of filing it every year. And it's a very simple bill, and hope that you would agree.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Representative. Are there any questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much, Representative. Okay, Aaron, are there any folks in the waiting room who would like to testify on this bill?
I don't see anyone with their hands raised, Senator Carson.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing on House Bill 190. Okay, next, we're going to open the public hearing on 283. And we're going to recognize, I believe, the prime sponsor is Representative DiLorenzo.
Representative DiLorenzo, if you're here, could you raise your hand? I don't see her in the attendees. Looks like
Okay.
Representative Schuett has her hand raised.
Yes, okay, she's next on the list. Why don't we go to Representative Schuett?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning again, committee members. For the record, I am Representative Diane Schuett, Pembroke and Chichester, Merrimack District 20, and also a member of House ED&A. In the absence of the prime sponsor, I will just tell you folks briefly, you can read in the text of the bill that Mr. Rentworth Cheswill was a very valued member of the Newmarket community. Although being a gentleman of color, he was a veteran of the Revolutionary War. He went on to serve his town in many elected capacities, donated the core of what became the town library. Very, very valuable citizen, and we were glad to learn about him in House ED&A. Our committee overwhelmingly supported this proposal, just not the idea of putting it into statute. Therefore, I created the amendment which changed the bill to just a one-day celebration of his birth, which was April 11th, unfortunately. And this would have been the 275th anniversary of his birth date. We were hoping that this would come to the House soon after our February hearing. And unfortunately, the House put off session days until just the last 3 days of last week. If it had passed earlier, we would have requested that the Senate might have accelerated their acceptance of this proclamation to have it be able to be celebrated more correctly on his actual birth date. That being said, we understand that the town of Newmarket celebrates it every year. They are planning a monument in his honor. I hope that some of you may have seen a piece that WMUR had on Mr. Cheswill on their Chronicle segment. I think you can probably access it streaming online. He was, as I said, a very valuable member of their community. And more importantly, House ED&A felt that the town recognizing him every year and perhaps approaching the governor to do a proclamation every year on his birthday would really garner more attention than a simple site in the RSA, which might just be passed over in future years. So we hope that you would look kindly on this proposal and endorse our passing of House Bill 283. Thank you very much for your time, and I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Representative Schuett. Are there any questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. I will I do hope the committee had an opportunity to view the WMUR segment. It was sent to all of us by Representative DiLorenzo. Okay, next we have Michael Cahill.
Senator Carson, I do see Representative DiLorenzo here now. Do you want to go with her first?
Yes, why don't we go with Representative DiLorenzo?
Representative, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Well, thank you, committee, and thank you, Senator Carson. It's wonderful to see you again. in your committee. There's not much more that I can say. I think Representative Schuett outlined it perfectly, and I know that, you know, you're pressed for time and have run over, so I will just say thank you, and I hope that you will support this bill. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions for Representative DiLorenzo? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony, Representative DiLorenzo, and thank you for sending that the clip from WMUR to the committee. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Okay, next we're going to go to Michael Cahill, or I believe it's Representative Cahill.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I am Representative Cahill from Newmarket, and I have a confession to make. I've lived in this town for many years, and I can't tell you how many times I've driven past a sign commemorating Mr. Chetworth at the cemetery, and I never stopped to read it. It was only through the testimony on by a former member, the Honorable Chris Roberts from the western part of the state, who one day spoke about Wentworth Cheswell during Black History Month. And Chris Roberts served 3 terms in the House, was also on the City Council in Keene and on the school board, this after serving 25 years in the Marine Reserve. So he also biracial, had a great deal in common with the early citizen of Newmarket. So I was pleased to learn about Wentworth Cheswell. And there was an earlier flurry of activity for myself because the date, April 11th, 2021 has passed. I was thinking maybe we should put this into statute, but I've been persuaded by the chair of the committee that it is more appropriate to go with our local celebration and perhaps invite the governor presently residing in the neighboring town, also in my district. So we'll hope to do that in the future, and I do urge you to support the bill.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Representative. Are there any questions for the committee? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much, Representative. Aaron, are there any other folks that would like to testify?
I don't see anyone else with their hands raised.
Okay, I am going to go ahead and close the public hearing on House Bill 283. And we're going to go to the final bill of the day, which is House Bill 456. So I'm going to open House Bill 456. I believe Representative Vickers is on the line. And so why don't we go to Representative Vickers to amend the bill. Amend the bill. Open the bill. It's been a long morning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We already amended the bill, but
yeah, I know.
in EDNA. So I'm Representative Tony Lekas, representing the towns of Hudson and Pelham, and that should stop shortly. I apologize.
That's okay.
I can't get to it easily. Yeah. Which is also part of the chair's district. So I'm going to introduce this bill, although Madam Chair, as one of the sponsors, you might even have more info on it than I do. What this does is it permits the Secretary of State, who manages the vital records, to provide a limited set of those records to the Department of Corrections that the department needs to perform its duties. And they're just simple records on data on deaths, marriages, and divorces. And they're used to provide various functions the department has, including things like, dealing with charging inmates for things and various other issues. And the testimony we got said that if they were not able to access that information, they would need to pay to contract with some outside data providers to get it. I mean, the information is generally available. The amendment adds language to make it even more explicit that the data is limited to what is required. And while looking at the statute, we also noticed 2 basic Scrivener errors. There were cases, I think, where it should have been data and they had put in date. And so while we were there, we corrected those. And I'll answer any questions if people have them.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Representative Lekas. Are there any questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, we're going to go to Commissioner Hanks.
Commissioner, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair and honorable members of the committee. My name is Helen Hanks. I'm the Commissioner for the Department of Corrections for the record. And I thank the House for putting this amended bill forward and appreciate your time as late as you've been this morning and continuing to prevail and listening to my testimony. So we are in support of this bill. Our goal is to do a better job, quite frankly, using a data set to engage in collecting restitution and other obligations as ordered by the court. The statute being New Hampshire 651-63 speaks primarily to victims shall have a priority over all other allocations. And we believe that this piece of legislation provides through a memorandum of agreement with Vital Records, the very limited data set for us to really dedicate and efficiently use our case technician time in soliciting those dollars and following through our statutory obligations. And just, I did send some testimony with some data. To be clear, we have approximately 13,000 people in what would be a collection only status. And we really, again, want to focus our resources on those people who owe restitution and other obligations, and learning that information both through understanding that we have found just by happenstance, people have passed away. And I think we can do a better job as a state with this limited data set and cleaning up the information we have within the department. With that, I would certainly take any questions this fine committee may have and appreciate your time in looking at the state and all the legislation before you.
Thank you very much for your testimony this morning, Commissioner Hanks. Are there any questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much, Commissioner.
Thank you, everyone. Be well.
Aaron, is there anyone in the waiting room who would like to speak to House Bill 456?
I don't see, I do see David Scanlon with his hand raised.
Okay, why don't we go to Mr. Scanlon? Good morning, Mr. Scanlon.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm David Scanlon, Deputy Secretary of State. And I just wanted to make a comment about our Vital Records Division, which in most states is held in the Department of Health and Human Services. Vital Records is a data collection department, division that collects a lot of the personal, private, confidential information of New Hampshire citizens when they have a vital event, which would be a birth, a death, a divorce, a marriage, adoption, things like that. Most of the data that is in that system, first of all, we are charged in a very significant way in statute in keeping that data and information private and confidential. The exception to that has been sharing the information with the Department of Health and Human Services. And that information is mostly used for them to track issues related to medical issues. So, in the case of the pandemic, for example, they may be tracking certain areas related to the virus and how it's moving through the state of New Hampshire. And when they report information publicly, it is always done in the aggregate form so that the personal data of a citizen is not being released. Then there was a request to share that information with the retirement system, in terms of, I guess, being able to track who beneficiaries are of retirees. And that's fine. We have memorandums of understandings with both agencies, Health and Human Services and Retirement, that really specifies the minimum amount of data that we can provide to accomplish the needs and the goals. And that's something that we can certainly do with the Department of Corrections. However, I do want to raise as a policy issue the concern that we have about using this information to start going after citizens for collections and things like that. I mean, I think we have had requests from the Department of Revenue Administration in the past to get certain data from our corporations division. which we keep confidential for that same reason, collections. And, it may be a sound policy, public policy interest to use information for that purpose. But I would be concerned about the chilling effect that it might have on the citizens of the state of New Hampshire, providing the information to vital records, that we keep, for, the historic uses of that agency. That's the only thing that I would throw out there, Madam Chair. I mean, I'm confident that we can work well with Department of Corrections, craft a memorandum of understanding that, that satisfies the concerns of both agencies and move forward. I would just hope that this doesn't steamroll into something bigger where we have a lot of other state agencies coming to seek similar information for, contacting citizens for collections and other things. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony this morning, Mr. Scanlon. Are there any questions from the committee? So, Mr. Scanlon, I just want to make sure that what you're looking for is some sort of memorandum of understanding between the Archives Division and the requesting agency as to how the information is going to be used.
Yes, Madam Chair, and that's actually written in the bill. I think it's covered pretty well in the bill. It would be a memorandum of understanding between the Division of Vital Records and the Department of Corrections on the information that would be provided, the manner in which it would be provided, the security protocols for keeping that information confidential, except for the limited use of the agency.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that everyone knew that it was already in there. Okay, all right. Thank you very much for your testimony this morning.
Thank you.
Aaron, are there any other individuals who would like to speak on House Bill 456?
Senator Carson, it doesn't look like anyone has their hand raised.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the hearing on House Bill 456. I know that we've run a little bit behind on our hearings, but we do have some bills that I think we could probably exec this morning and still be done hopefully by noon. I will ask that we hold off on House Bill 499. I think this one dealing with the facial recognition, I think we need to really talk about that, and I don't believe we have a lot of time to do that this morning. Also, House Bill 141. I think it's a great idea that we wait until we hear back from the Municipal Association when they present this to their at their meeting on Friday. We have also exec House Bill 369. So we have the other 1, 2, 3, 4 bills that we heard this morning. We can take them up, I believe, as we heard them, I think, unless I've gotten them out of order, which is entirely possible. But why don't we start with House Bill 128? This is the bill that was filed by Representative Aaron. I know, Cam, I gotta go.
I just want to make sure we were clear
session.
we weren't in exec session yet.
Yes.
Okay.
So can I get a motion to go into executive session? Senator Prentice moves, seconded by Senator Ricciardi. So is there any discussion on the motion? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and call the roll. Senator Ricciardi?
Yes.
Senator Prentice?
Yes.
Senator Reagan?
Yes.
Senator Kavanaugh?
Yes.
And Senator Carson? Yes. So the first bill we're going to take up is House Bill 128, which is adding notification requirements to the weather modification statute. Is there a motion on this bill?
I move on to pass and consent calendar.
Okay, so first we will take up the ought to pass motion. Is there a second? Seconded by Senator Prentice. Okay, is there any discussion on the bill? I would just like to applaud Representative Aaron for all her hard work on this. She heard us last year and she did a lot of work on working on this. So thank you very much, Representative Aaron. Okay, so seeing no further discussion, I'm going to go ahead and call the roll. Senator Reagan,
Yes.
Senator Rishardi,
Yes.
Senator Prentice,
Yes.
Senator Kavanaugh,
Yes.
and Senator Carson, yes. Senator Reagan has also moved the consent calendar. Is there a second on the consent calendar? Senator Rishardi moves this consent calendar. Is there any discussion on the consent calendar motion? Okay. Seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and call the roll. Senator Reagan,
Yes.
Senator Rishardi,
Yes.
Senator Prentice,
Yes.
Senator Kavanaugh,
Yes.
and Senator Carson, yes. Senator Reagan, would you like to take this one out? Okay. Okay. Next, we have House Bill 190, which is the changing the financial.
Pass and consent.
Okay. Senator Reagan moves ought to pass. Is there a second?
With Senator Reagan.
Okay, Senator Prentice seconds. Okay, is there any discussion on House Bill 190? Okay, I will just say that I also sit on the Legislative Ethics Committee, and we had a very, very good discussion about doing this, and everyone agreed that this is a good way to go. So, seeing that, I will go ahead and call the roll. Senator Reagan.
Yes.
Senator Rishardi.
Yes.
Senator Prentice,
Yes.
Senator Kavanaugh,
Yes.
and Senator Carson, yes. Senator Reagan has also moved the consent calendar. Is there a second? Seconded by Senator Kavanaugh. Is there any discussion on the consent calendar motion? Okay, seeing none, I will call the roll. Senator Reagan,
Yes.
Senator Rishardi,
Yes.
Senator Prentice,
Yes.
Senator Kavanaugh,
Yes.
and Senator Carson, yes. And I will do the little blurb thing on this one. Okay, next we're going to go to House Bill 283, which is proclaiming April 11th, 2021 as Wentworth Cheswell Day.
Move on to pass.
Okay, Senator Kavanaugh moves out to pass, seconded by Senator Prentice. Okay, I would like to offer an amendment to this bill. It would be a committee amendment that we're going to change some dates here. The first is on the line that says an act proclaiming April 11th, 2021 as Wentworth Cheswell Day. I would like to change that to an act proclaiming April 11th, 2022 as Wentworth Cheswell Day. The second date is on the second line where it says that they would like to, the governor shall proclaim April 21st, 2020. Now that would be changed to 2022 as Wentworth Cheswell Day in New Hampshire to celebrate the 276th anniversary of his birth. Again, this is going to take effect upon passage. So we're changing 3 dates. The first is in the enactment line, changing it to 2022. The second is on the first line where the governor shall proclaim April 11th, 2022 as Wentworth Cheswell Day to celebrate the 276th anniversary of his birth. Can I get a motion on the committee amendment?
So moved.
Moved by Senator Kavanaugh, seconded by Senator Prentice. Is there any discussion on the amendment? Okay, seeing none, I will call the roll. Senator Reagan,
Yes.
Senator Rishardi,
Yes.
Senator Prentice,
Yes.
Senator Kavanaugh,
Yes.
and Senator Carson. Yes. Okay, is there a motion on the bill as amended? Senator Kavanaugh moves ought to pass as amended. Senator Prentice seconds. Is there any discussion on the bill as amended? Okay, seeing none, I will go ahead and call the roll. Senator Reagan,
Yes.
Senator Rishardi,
Yes.
Senator Prentice,
Yes.
Senator Kavanaugh,
Yes.
and Senator Carson, yes. Is there a motion for the consent calendar?
So moved.
Okay, Senator Kavanaugh moves on consent. Is there a second? Senator Prentice seconds. Is there any discussion on the consent calendar motion? Seeing none, I will call the roll. Senator Reagan,
Yes.
Senator Rishardi,
Yes.
Senator Prentice,
Yes.
Senator Kavanaugh,
Yes.
and Senator Carson, yes. Senator Prentice, would you like to take this one out?
Yes.
Okey doke.
Happy to.
Okay, the last one we have is House Bill 456. Is there a motion on House Bill 456?
I move on to pass and consent.
Okay, Senator Reagan moves ought to pass,
Second.
seconded by Senator Kavanaugh. Is there any discussion on the ought to pass motion? Okay, seeing none, I will call the roll. Senator Reagan,
Yes.
Senator Rishardi,
Yes.
Senator Prentice,
Yes.
Senator Kavanaugh,
Yes.
and Senator Carson, yes. We also have a motion by Senator Reagan for the consent calendar. Is there a second? Seconded by Senator Prentice. Is there any discussion on the consent calendar motion? Okay, seeing none, I will call the roll. Senator Reagan,
Yes.
Senator Rishardi,
Yes.
Senator Prentice,
Yes.
Senator Kavanaugh,
Yes.
and Senator Carson, yes. Senator Reagan, would you like to do this one as well?
Sure.
Okay, so that takes care of everything that we have today. We do have 3 bills that we're also holding. But it's getting closer to noon, and I'm sure all of you would like to conclude our business today. We did receive 7 additional bills from the House from last week from their regular calendar. So that leaves us, I believe, a total of either 13 or 14 bills left to hear. So I think we're really in a good place at this point. We have to keep our eye on those dates, which I believe is May 15th for all fiscal note bills, and all other bills have to be on the floor by June 3rd. So I think we're in a good place, and so I will take a motion to come out of executive session, moved by Senator Prentice, seconded by Senator Kavanaugh. Is there any discussion on that motion? Okay, seeing none, I will call the roll. Senator Reagan,
Yes.
Senator Rishardi,
Yes.
Senator Prentice,
Yes.
Senator Kavanaugh,
Yes.
and Senator Carson, yes. Thank you all this morning for all your work. I appreciate it. It's always a pleasure to see you all. So take care, and everybody have a great rest of the day. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Yes,
There
Kim?
needs to be a motion to close the meeting. We just
Oh.
closed the motion for
moved.
executive.
Oh, all right. I need a motion to close the meeting. Senator Prentice? Yes, moves
Motion to
seconded
adjourn.
by Senator Kavanaugh. Okay, I will call the roll. Senator Reagan,
Yes.
Senator Rishardi,
Yes.
Senator Prentice,
Yes.
Senator Kavanaugh,
Yes.
and Senator Carson. Yes. Okay, everybody, take care. Thank you very much, Aaron and Kim, for all your work today. And we'll talk to everyone later.